Chapter 6. I suppose it must be a shock, if you thought, like the guy who wrote about me in the paper, that I was dead. Yeah, she looked at me across the sitting room into which I'd distractingly shown her. We were standing either side of the window, each confronting a familiar shadow cast by a total stranger. God, I wasn't sure whether to, you're Michaela Lanyon? Yeah, well, I call myself Emma Morosco, actually. Haven't done for years, ever since I ran away. You weren't murdered? No, you just vanished of your own accord. I had to, leaving your family to think you were dead. There was nothing I could do about that, not without. She turned aside and bowed her head. I didn't like it, I didn't enjoy it, but I had to get away from there, from the life I was leading. Why? That doesn't matter. It's not why I came. I came because of Nicky. Too late, he died, believing you had been murdered by Brian Jakes. She sighed and ran a hand over her face. This isn't easy, Christ. A shudder ran through her. Could I sit? Yes, of course, I'm sorry. I ushered her into an armchair, her vulnerability undermining my anger. Look, do you want some tea? You haven't got anything stronger, have you? Afraid not. Tea then. Yeah, fine. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on. As I measured some tea into the pot and arranged cups and saucers on a tray, I reeled mentally before the mundane reality of Michaela Lanyon's return from the dead. For a second I almost believed she wouldn't be there when I went back into the sitting room, but she was, hunched forward in an armchair just as I'd left her. She looked as I entered and smiled weakly. Sorry about this, honest. You don't have to apologize to me. No, but I reckon I have to explain. Teenagers run away from home every week, and a good few never come back. What's there to explain? My tone sounded harsh, even to me. Sorry, I grinned ruefully. Now we're both apologizing. Perhaps we both need to, in our different ways. We each ran out on Nicky, didn't we? Yes, I suppose we did. If I'd known he was likely to commit suicide, I'd have, she shrugged, done something. Me too. I had no idea Mum was dead or that Nicky was so desperate, truly. I believe you. I used to talk about you so much. His good friend Chris Napier. He would have never had a word said against you. Would never admit. She shook her head, sparing me, it seemed, the words of condemnation I could as easily have uttered myself. Then the kettle came to the boil. I filled the pot, put it on the table and stood beside it, waiting for the tea to mash. How did you find me? I asked, as much to fill the silence as to satisfy my curiosity. I phoned Trudeau House. The receptionist gave me Grayson's number. That's how I knew where you were. I followed you from there, even when you got here, though. I hesitated. Why? 16 years is a long time to be thought dead. You get used to it, it becomes a habit, and habits aren't easy to break. So why did you break it? Because Nicky's death ties you and me. We can't walk away from him now. He's forced us to listen, hasn't he? He's forced us to take notice. Notice of what? His belief, his certainty. She watched me as I poured the tea, nodding yet yes to milk and sugar. I carried our cups across and sat down in the armchair opposite her. I'm taking a bet he spoke to you before he hanged himself. That's why he went to Truro, to see you in the place where you'd been friends, am I right? Yes, you are. Then I'll take another bet that this is a safer one, because it's only what he was forever saying to me when I was a little girl. He thought our father was innocent, a wronged man. He told you that, didn't he? In his own way, I suppose he did. But you didn't believe him, no more than I did. When I was old enough to grasp what had happened. Nobody ever believed Nicky, not even your mother. She wanted to, but she didn't have the strength of mind to withstand Considine's drip, drip, drip campaign to portray himself as the noble saviour of a murdered widow. It doesn't sound as if there was much love lost between you and your stepfather. Love. There was a real passion in her voice now. I hated that man. I still do. He made my life hell. How? How do you think? Her stare challenged me to draw the obvious conclusion. It was him I was running from. I preferred to let my mother and my brother believe I was dead rather than let Considine think there was even a possibility I might still be alive somewhere, because he'd have come looking for certain, searching and prying and probing, and she broke off. I'm sorry, you don't want to hear this. Michaela, call me Emma, please. That's who I've been for 16 years. All right, Emma. Where have you been for those 16 years? London. Isn't that where all the runaways goes? It wasn't so bad. There was this guy I met in Clacton that late Easter. He was on holiday there. Well, we sort of hit it off, and he offered to put me up if I needed a place to stay in the city. Nice bloke. gay actually. Maybe that's why he was so nice. Anyway, he gave me a start. Since then, it's just been an ordinary life. I work shifts on a supermarket checkout. Home's a high-rise flat, not much is it? No husband, no children, a dead-end job. But it's what you have to expect if you do a runner from your own identity, and I've never regretted it, never once. It's been worth it to be out of Constantine's reach. Aren't you taking quite a risk by coming forward now? I'm not coming forward. She set down her cup and stared at me intently. Nikki told me I could trust you, Chris, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Nobody must know I'm alive. If Constantine ever found out, it can't be that bad. I couldn't sleep at night if I knew he knew. If I thought he knew. She folded her arms defensively around herself. There's nothing he's not capable of. I held my hand reassuringly. All right, okay. Don't worry. I won't tell anyone, especially not Constantine. You can trust me, for Nicky's sake, if you like. You're right, I let him down, but tell me, Miss Emma, what can I do now he's dead to make up for that? You can prove him right, she replied without even a momentary hesitation. You can prove our father didn't murder your uncle. I thought I was dreaming at first, and so I was, in a way. The ringing doorbell became a bumblebee, buzzing in my ear ever louder and more threateningly as I traversed some soon-to-be-forgotten landscape of my sleeping mind. Then I woke and realised it was the real solid brass doorbell at my home in Crescent Road that was ringing. It was pitch dark in my bedroom, but there was a light visible around the door and a sound of movement along the landing. I rolled over and peered at the luminous dial of my alarm clock. It was 3:15, the very middle of the night, yet there was somebody at the door. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, I knew the time meant something very serious had happened. There was footsteps on the stairs now, and a strengthening of the light as another switch was thrown. Then a creaking of the floorboards in Gran and Grandad's room. I clambered out of bed, walked to the door and edged it open, letting my eyes adjust gradually to the brightness. Mum was standing by the banisters in dressing gown and slippers, looking down into the hall. I assumed Dad had gone down and that it was him. I could hear fiddling with the bolts. The letterbox rattled as he pulled the front door open, and a gruff but subdued male voice said, Mr. Napier? Yes, Dad replied. What can I do for you, Constable? Sorry for disturbing you at this hour, sir. I have some bad news. Can I step inside? The door closed behind him, and his voice sounded louder in the confines of the hall. It concerns your uncle, Mr. Joshua Carnaworth. Is he ill? I'm afraid he's dead, sir. Gran and Grandad emerged from the room just as the words were spoken. I couldn't see them, but I could see Mum glance around at them. Did you hear that? She murmured. I heard it, said Gran, but I can't quite believe it. She started down the stairs with Mum and Grandad in pursuit. What happened? She demanded. As she reached the hall, did you say my brother Joshua's dead? I'm very sorry to say that he is, madam. But he was in perfect health when I last saw him, only a couple of days ago. I stepped out into the landing and tiptoed to the banister for a view. Then I saw Pam standing at the top of the stairs. She frowned at me and pressed a finger to her lips. When did this happen, Constable? He was found just a couple of hours ago, madam. He died in his sleep? Not exactly. When I say found, what do you mean? Out with it. The constable sighed. I mean, madam, that Mr. Carnaworth was found dead in Barrack Lane just after midnight tonight, dead in the street. He'd been stabbed several times. Good God Almighty, mumbled Grandad. Murdered? Said Mum disbelievingly. It seems so, madam. Who did it? Demanded Gran. We don't know yet, madam, but we have a good description of a man seen running from the scene of the crime, and you can be assured no effort will be spared. Murdered? Put in Dad. Here in Truro? Yes, sir. But why? It's too early to... Money, announced Grant, as if there could be no room for doubt, as if she'd always feared such a fate might overtake him. It's been easy. It'll have been for his money. Nance Worthall, summer of 46, I said, as I handed the photograph I'd taken of my 10-year-old friend to his sister all her lifetime and more later. Nicky was grinning down at me from his perch halfway up an uneven haystack on Jago's farm in a snapshot of his hard-wooden mind. We never went back, I added, as she scanned the faded prints. You never can, she murmured. Still, when you see something like this, you feel as if it might almost be possible, don't you? As if you could step into the black and white past and lead Nicky out of it. But you can't. He's still there, but he'll never be here again. Doing what you did, running away, must have meant turning your back on every kind of keepsake. She shook her head. Not really. I didn't have any. I'm not sure how much Mum kept when she left Cornwall, but whatever there was, she lost in the flood. You mean the flood at Jaywick in '53? Constantine told me about it. Yeah, well, he wasn't there, was he? But you're right. Jaywick, January '53, is just about my earliest memory. Nicky waking me in the middle of the night with water lapping around my bed. It was cold, like ice, and the bungalow was moving. It seemed like the end of the world. Nicky got Mum and me onto a mattress and we floated up into the flood water. He stayed calm while Mum just swept, and I was too frightened to do anything. I remember watching him swim to the front door and pull it open, letting in a rush of water. Then he swam to the back of the bungalow and broke through the wall with a saucepan. It was only a plank wall, of course, but it took some doing. I thought he'd gone mad, that he was trying to drown us, but he realized he had to let the water find its own level or the whole bungalow could turn turtle. Then he got us up into the roof space where he said it would be safe. We sat up there all night on the rafters, in the freezing cold and pitch dark. Nicky smashed a hole in the roof and shouted for help, but there was no answer. We found out later our nearest neighbours had all drowned. When it got light, we looked out, and all you could see was grey, swirling water on every side. There were bungalows actually floating by us, and dustbins and cars and God knows what. Our bungalow was wedged against a brick shed by the current. I suppose that's what saved us, but actually without Nicky, Mum and I would have drowned for certain. He saved our lives. That's literally all we got out with when the rescue boat came for us. Our lives, everything else, clothes, furniture, the lot, down to the smallest possessions, ended up in the North Sea. But thanks to Nicky, we were still alive. I suppose that's why I can't accept that he died in vain. You might have to, I said gently. I wouldn't know how to start trying to prove your father's innocent. Even supposing I thought he was. Can't you give him the benefit of the doubt for Nicky's sake? I can, but where does that get us? I've been thinking, you see. His eyes sparkled with sudden enthusiasm. That journalist, John Prideaux. Yes, he said Edmund Tully was released from prison 12 years ago. Well, he's the one man who knows the truth, isn't he? The absolute truth. If he lied at the trial, he'll lie now. Besides, we have no way of contacting him. He could be anywhere. He could be dead, for God's sake. If he was the same age as your father, that would make him 70 now. Wouldn't the Home Office have told Prideaux if he was dead? Maybe, so it's odds on he's still alive, even so. And Nicky became more and more obsessed with the case after I left. That's what Constantine said, wasn't it? Collecting press cuttings about the trial, going through the evidence over and over again, searching for the answer. Don't you see? He's bound to have gone looking for Tully. So he kept everything. He always did. If Nicky found Tully, there'd be a record of his whereabouts. At the very least, a clue to them amongst his possessions. And where are those possessions now? With Constantine, presumably. Exactly. She fixed me with her appealing gaze. That's why I can't do this. And you have to. For Nicky and me, it has to be you. There's no one else. I might have found it more difficult to absorb the shock of Uncle Joshua's death if Gran and my parents had been open with me about the details. As it was, their determination to keep me in the dark or shield me from the gruesome facts, as they no doubt saw it, proved me with a mystery to puzzle over. This gave me more than enough with which to occupy my thoughts. As early morning blended into a long day of dislocation and uncertainty, Dad and Gran departed straight after breakfast for Trudella House, leaving Mum to open up the shop. Assisted by Pam, Granddad stayed at home with me. He was to remain there in case of messages. I was to remain with him on the grounds that I'd be a nuisance anywhere else. What I wanted to do above all was to see Nicky. No, I could rely on him for a full account of the facts. I reckon he was bound to know more than me, since he actually lived at Trudella House, which I imagined to be the nerve centre of police investigations. I assumed that was why Dad and Gran had gone there, and the wish to share the grief with the Lanyards. But when I suggested as much to Granddad, he indignantly rejected the idea and unintentionally revealed what may have been their true motive. He was your Gran's brother. He was no relative of the Lanyards. It's not for them to take charge of his affairs, much as they might like to. So amidst the dismayed bereavements, with the lineaments of a power struggle were beginning to appear. The spring truce was over, broken by Uncle Joshua's death. Gran had gone to Trudella House to stake out her territory. But was it her territory or Cordelia's Lanion's? It had taken us only a few hours for bereavement to turn to rivalry. And what of Uncle Joshua? How could he be dead when I'd seen him stout and proud and striding the previous afternoon, vanishing to the back garden? I played tennis against the garage wall as the day dragged on, my thoughts coming back to him all the time. He'd seemed so permanent, so indestructible, like some outcrop of granite up on the moors. You couldn't break granite with a knife. Something more than a thin steel blade would have been needed to topple Uncle Joshua, something more profound and elemental. A blood feud, perhaps, like in several of the Sherlock Holmes stories I'd read. Maybe some secret society had reached out its vengeful arm from Alaska to strike him down. I was already convinced, despite Grandad's skepticism, that Uncle Josh had gone to Barragland to meet somebody by appointment. It was the other side of the city from Treador's house, after all. Why else would he have been there at midnight? He'd been heading in that direction when I last saw him, on urgent business, by his own admission. Had he returned to Treador's house in the interim? If not, where had he been, and why? But answering my question was top of nobody's agenda. Enlightenment of our meagre kind came only when Dad and Gran returned with Mum and Pam at 6 o'clock. A family conference of sorts was staged around the tea table, with everybody too taken with events to bother keeping any of them from me. The murderer had apparently been apprehended. Our clerk at the railway station had recognised his description as matching that of a passenger he sold a ticket to for the first train to London that morning. The man had been taken off the train at Plymouth and was presumably back in Truro by now, being interrogated by the police. His name and motive had not been disclosed. Supposing them to be known at all, only the nature of his crime was clear. Murder. None of us expressed any doubt of his guilt. Gran had been to see Uncle Joshua's body, but much I gleaned from her description of him at looking uncommonly peaceful. I wanted to ask where she'd seen him, but couldn't summon the nerve. Perhaps that was just as well, in view of the temper she flew into when Pam asked about the Lanyons. Anyone would think he was Cordelia's brother, not mine, from the way she's carrying on. What were they ever to him except hired help? They're sitting there in Joshua's house like it was their own, with never so much as a by your leave. Her disrespect, I call it. There'll be time enough to sort out such matters later, Ma, said Dad. Time enough? That's what Mr. Cloak had the nerve to tell me, all in due course, Mrs. Napier. But whose course? That's what I like to know. We've the right to be told now. Uncle Joshua went to see Mr. Cloak yesterday, I remarked, eager to involve myself in the discussion. Suddenly silence consumed the room. All eyes were turned to me. The insignificance of my words was slowly absorbed. Then Gran said, "What do you mean, Christian?" She stared at me, her brow furrowing, as I stumbled through an account of my walk with Uncle Joshua's 24 hours before. She seemed to find it hard to believe he'd sought my advice about anything but business in Lemon Street, meant his solicitor. About that she was certain, and from that certainty it was a short jump to a disturbing conclusion. I told you, Melvin, she said, turning to Dad, this is about money. Solicitors and murders have that much in common. Money's at the root of it, and Joshua had more than was good for him. But the real question is, who? Dad broke off, regretting, I think, the hint of greed in his voice. Uncle Joshua was only 18 hours dead and a long way from being buried. It was too soon, too offensively premature, to be pondering who'd profit by his death, but it was in his mind, as it was in Gran's, and it couldn't be dislodged. I mean to find out sooner than Mr. Cloak might care for, said Gran slowly and deliberately, as if Dad had finished the question. Then she added, without any apparent awareness of irony, I owe it to Joshua. No one's interested, are they? Mused Michaela Lanyon, alias Emma Moresco, as she read the note Don Prideaux had sent me with a copy of his newspaper article. That's why he couldn't sell the story on, because nobody really cares. I do. I intended the remark to be consolatory, but she gave no sign she'd so much as heard it. Do you know what the weirdest thing is? Until I saw his photograph in the paper, some old police mugshot, I didn't even know what my father looked like. Did he know about you before he died? She glanced up at me. No, Mum was only 3.5 months pregnant when he was hanged, and I was a small baby, so she was hardly showing. She told me she thought it kind of not to tell him, but I'm not sure she didn't regret that later. I've often wished she had told him. It would mean there was something between us, something real, not just a biological fact. As it was, I felt one worse than an orphan. I was always afraid people would find out, neighbours, school friends, and label me the murderer's daughter. Constantine threatened me with just that several times when I wouldn't. Her expression faltered. She rose and moved away from the room, resuming with her gaze trained on the world beyond the window. I suppose I was running from Michael Landon as well as Neville Constantine when I left Clacton that day. Have you been planning it for a long time? Thinking, yes, a long time, but actual planning? No more than a couple of weeks since meeting Norman in a coffee bar over Easter. Without his offer of accommodation, I wouldn't have had the nerve. I bought some second-hand clothes and hid them in my locker at school. I took them with me in my bag when I left that afternoon, changing into them in the loo in the recreation ground, then hung around for an hour before catching the 5 o'clock train to London. Norman knew who I was, of course, but nobody else. Then or since, I haven't trusted a soul with the truth in all those years, apart from me. Yeah, apart from you. She looked back at me. So it's pretty important you don't let me down. I can't guarantee to prove your father innocent. You know, I can't promise the impossible. I'm only asking you to try. Not much, is it? Not too much, certainly. Does that mean you'll give it a go? Yes. A smile suddenly flashed into her face. I suppose it does. A police spokesman confirmed last night that the man arrested earlier in the day after being removed from a London-bound train at Plymouth North Road Station, Edmund Tully had been formally charged with the murder in Truro on Thursday night of Joshua Carnaworth, a wealthy and highly respected resident of the city. The spokesman said that Tully would appear before Truro magistrates on Monday and added that a further arrest in connection with the case could not be ruled out. So I ran the front page in the Western Morning News of Saturday, 9th August 1947. I first read it craning over Pam's shoulder in the kitchen at Crescent Road while we were supposed to be washing up after breakfast. It told me 2 things that I found tantalizing as well as baffling. First, the murder of somebody I never heard of, presumably a stranger who'd come to Truro for the specific reason of doing Uncle Joshua harm. My theory about an Alaskan equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan was thus particularly vindicated, at least in my own mind. Secondly, there might be a second murderer, or an accomplice or accessory of some kind. The police spokesman couldn't only have declined to rule out a further arrest because he was actually expecting one. I decided there and then to go and see Nicky. It was only what I normally have done on a Saturday morning anyway, and granted my parents had evidently been too preoccupied to think of prohibiting it. So many excuses were ready-made. Nicky might know more than I did. Above all, he might be able to help me start believing in the reality of Uncle Joshua's death. The event still seemed like a cross between a bad dream and a James Cagney gangster movie. It was going on out there somewhere, but my brain refused to register it as a fact. Uncle Joshua was dead, but not to me. So as soon as the washing up was done, I told Pam I was going down to the railway station to do some train spotting, instead of which I made for Treador House. I planned to make a circuitous route via Daniel Road, Strangeway Terrace and Gas Hill in order to avoid passing either the shop where Mum might waylay me or Mr. Cloak's office at the bottom of Lemon Street, where Gran or Dad might be intended to put in an appearance. This route had the additional advantage of crossing Lemon Street at its other end and close to its junction with Barrack Lane. If there was anything to be seen there, I meant to see it, and there was something to see, something that achieved what the protracted agonizing of my parents and grandparents had failed to do. At the top of Lemon Street, dead opposite me, as I emerged from Daniel Road, stood the Lander Monument, a tall granite column supporting a statue of Richard Lander, the famous Turonian explorer of darkest Africa. At its foot, a man in overalls was working with a broom and bucket, scrubbing at the paving stones, an acrid smell of cleaning fluid drifted across to greet me, and I stopped, puzzled by the intensity of his efforts. A dark and patchy stain strangled around from the monument towards Barrack Lane, but at first I couldn't think what it might be, nor why its removal should be so important. Then as I stared across the road, it came to me. Uncle Joshua's blood spattered along a length of Turo's pavement. It was real. In my mind's eye, I could see the moonlight struggle at the foot of the monument, the flash of the blade, the fatal lunges. I could see Tully turn to flee, while Uncle Joshua reeled and stumbled towards the corner of Barrack Lane, blood gouting from his wounds. I could see and believe it all. Suddenly I was running down Lemon Street, the slope speeding me on. The diversion was forgotten now. I just wanted to be as far as possible from the blood-stained pavement. Uncle Joshua had roller skated down this very hill as a youth, Gran had told me. I thought of him, young and lean and evil-eyed, outpacing me as I ran. I must have passed Mr. Cloak's office at the bottom, but I didn't notice. I dodged through the bustling shops in Boscawen Street and darted along Cathedral Lane to the spot where I had last seen Uncle Joshua. There I stopped, but there he wasn't. I could summon the scent of his cigar from my memory, the curve of his chin as he tossed me the coin, but already the luster of my immediacy was gone. He was fading, like a photograph exposed too soon. He was slipping away, and I could see it happening. I began following the route we'd taken from Trudeau House on Thursday in reverse, past Lenya's old home in St. Austell Street. I crossed Boscawen Bridge and up Tregal's Road. My pace slowed as I neared my destination. For some reason, I was beginning to dread arriving there, whereas earlier I could hardly wait to. Curiosity had turned to foreboding. When I reached the entrance to the drive, I stopped and crouched down to tighten my shoelace. They weren't loose, but I was now seriously worried about the wisdom of visiting the Lanyons. I wanted to see Nicky, but I didn't want to learn what that dark suspicion forming in the back of my mind really was. I couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd met Michael at Colway and Jude Yard, about their anxious, secretive talk. I couldn't stop being afraid of something I couldn't have named. As I stood up, I heard a car labouring down the drive in Lokia. It emerged slowly into view around the bank of the raised lawn and blinked at the sight of the bell on its bumper and the police sign across its radiator. It drew to a halt gently beside me, and the driver started checking for traffic, glancing to right and left. As he did so, I looked into the rear seat and saw, wedged between two burly Constable Michael Lanyon. Our eyes met, and he smiled faintly, as if to assure me there was nothing to worry about, as if the whole thing was just an amusing embarrassment. Then the car pulled out into the road. At the same moment, I heard rapid footfalls behind me, approaching down the drive. As I turned, they stopped, and there was Nicky, panting and tearful, staring at me from 10 yards away. What happened? I called him. They've arrested him, said Nicky. They've arrested Daddy. You do realise, don't you, I said, as he entered the outskirts of Reading, how compelling the evidence against your father was. I had volunteered to drive Emma into Reading when she left. Late night trains from Pangbourne being few and far between. Oh yes, she remembered, I realised. He was seen handing an envelope to Tully in a pub a couple of nights before the murder. The envelope with his fingerprints on it was later found in Tully's possession, stuffed with £500 worth of fibres. A witness overheard him telling Tully to do what he was being paid to do soon, otherwise it would be too late. And Tully said that was to kill old Joshua before he could change his will, under which your father was the sole beneficiary. Now, how could Nicky ever have hoped to overturn all that? I don't know, and I never know, unless we find out what progress he made over the years. If any, it could be none at all. I understand that. In a way, I'm almost prefer that. Why? Because the running out of my family wouldn't seem so bad, would it? It sounds as if you had a good reason. Maybe my father had a good reason too for doing the things that incriminated him. If so, Emma, I honestly don't think Nicky found out what it was, but can you be sure? No, I can't. That's why I'm going to Clacton tomorrow. I'm grateful, Chris, really. There's no need, and I'm sorry too that I can't trust you with more than on my telephone number. I suppose I'm out of practice at relying on other people. That's understandable. So would I be in your position? You're relying on people who isn't always a bad thing, believe me. But relying on people isn't always a bad thing, believe me. No, I saw a certain smile reflected in the neon lit windscreen. I'm sure it isn't. Thanks for listening.